We now move to our final panel session of the day, which I think brings together all of the things that we've been talking about throughout the morning. So we will be looking at driving growth through global competitiveness. And this session will look especially at how innovation drives growth, very much building on what Stephen's just been talking about, the role of policy, of regulation, and of capital markets in making that possible. Practical reforms that the industry and policy priorities that the industry can help boost growth and boost global competitiveness through working with regulators and government, and why that cooperation between industry, government, and regulators is absolutely essential and irreplaceable. We've got a fantastic panel to look at that, led by former Lord Mayor of the City of London, Alderman Sir William Russell, who is also a member of the board of the TheCityUK. Stephen Berger, Managing Director and Global Head of Government and Regulatory Policy at Citadel. Former Chair of the TheCityUK Leadership Council, Bruce Carnegie-Brown, who is also Chairman of Rothesay Life. Nazareen Gilbertson, Head of Corporate Development at ICE Clear Europe and ICE Futures Europe. Sharon Lewis, Partner, Sector Leader of Financial Institutions and Co-Chair of Digital Assets and the Blockchain Practice at Hogan Lovells. And Dan Neidle, Founder of Tax Policy Associates Limited. Could you please welcome them to the stage?
Welcome, everybody. And Miles, thank you. The great thing is Miles has made the introduction, so we can go straight on to the the questions from the chair. So I'm going to start with a question for all of you. So I will start with Bruce, but it's the question for all the panel. So we've heard across today's panels and keynotes that global competitiveness is now being shaped by how well innovation, capital policy and regulation work together. So from your perspective, what most directly drives growth today, and where do you think the UK is already genuinely competitive? Now, this is just starting us off, so not a long replies from everybody, and then we'll go into sort of that. But Bruce, start with you.
Well, I think clearly we are genuinely competitive in the area of financial services and related professional services. These are global industries for us, and they're industries in which we have considerable leadership. The issue for us is trying to adapt to a changing environment. So, for instance, we've celebrated London as a financial centre for many decades. How important is geography going to be as we move to a more digitalised world and a more distributed ability to be 24/7, as some of the earlier panels discussed? How relevant is geography to that? Also, clearly, the policies. What we've got is a conflict between the policies you need to be a global leader and a global centre of activity versus the national priorities of the country in which we work. And trying to find alignment between those is incredibly important. And I think to the point made by No Time to Lose, the excellent TheCityUK research, this is actually about getting to execution. I think we can diagnose the problem endlessly and has been well diagnosed, but can we move at pace to execute on the things that we need to do?
Very good. Thank you, Bruce. Sharon?
I agree with Bruce.
I hope lots of people will say that.
But the world is changing so quickly. I was in the States a few weeks ago, and the movement around digital capital markets, tokenization, stablecoin is so fast that we are competitive. But I think we really have got to change our pace. Yeah. And very quickly, to coin the phrase, no time to lose.
Absolutely. Very good. Stephen, based in New York, Cecil, but coming to London all the time, how do you see it from both sides of the Atlantic?
So first, my brother, older brother, his name was Bruce. So I was taught from a very young age to always say I agree with Bruce. Look, I believe the single most important factor is talent, both in the private sector and in the public sector. So ensuring the UK remains both a welcome destination for the best and brightest minds in the world and continues to invest in the education and talent development of its domestic workforce. I think those are key to driving innovation, fostering growth, and effectively attracting and deploying capital. I think the UK clearly has a historical competitive advantage on this front, but it's one that shouldn't be taken for granted. Last night, Harry Kane benefited from getting a second try at that penalty kick, but we all don't get second chances, so don't rest on the laurels.
So, and I totally agree with you on the talent. I mean, you know, as everyone in the room would know, as a past Lord Mayor of the City of London, this is the greatest city in the world. And as chair of Barbican, it's the cultural centre of the world, so that attracts a lot of the talent. So I totally agree with that. Dan?
I think when it comes to attracting talent, retaining talent, and attracting and retaining capital, tax is an area where the UK is currently losing out. If you look at the Tax Competitive Index published by the Tax Foundation in the US, you will see we languish right at the bottom, below countries like Italy, Greece, Sweden, countries with higher tax than us. So it's not that our tax is high, although our tax is historically high, it's that we tax badly. And that's made the UK uncompetitive in a few key areas. Maybe we can talk more about that later.
Brilliant. And Nazareen?
Yeah, I think representing an organisation that operates market infrastructure that underpins global energy and financial markets, I think fundamentally what drives growth is the ability to innovate iteratively, at pace, and with certainty. And I think the UK has some structural advantages in doing so. I think firstly is our regulatory philosophy being principles and outcome-based, being the DNA of our financial regulatory framework, is great for innovation because it doesn't prescribe every single detail as to how market participants need to act in every circumstance, but it gives the industry the space to learn and to develop with accountability and removing friction. I think the other key thing, and as the No Time to Lose report points out, is distribution. The UK is one of the most globally accessed wholesale financial markets, particularly in fixed income, currency, and commodity. And you know, at ICE we operate 3 of the world's most liquid short-term interest rate contracts, and that's traded and cleared right here in London using market infrastructure that's operated in London. 2/3 of the world's oil is priced off the ICE Brent benchmark, which is a price set here in the city. And that distribution is important because it creates liquidity, and liquidity attracts more participants, it lowers the cost of capital, and it makes the UK a more effective place for price discovery. So I think the UK has some really meaningful advantages that can encourage growth and encourage innovation.
Very good. Thank you. And now, Sharon, Hogan Lovells have been central, and I will refer to you as the fintech queen, Sharon, as you know, because Hogan Lovells made a big call on fintech very early on as a firm, and central in pushing the digitalization agenda in UK capital markets. And with other financial centres moving fast, what does the UK need to do to get onto a level playing field and build on the reforms already underway?
Gosh, fintech queen. I wasn't always a fintech queen. I'm a capital markets lawyer, and fintech was very much in the retail space. And it took a lot of feeling an outsider to really take hold of our fintech practice and to drive it when, you know, many of my colleagues were saying, is this not pro bono, Sharon? And it was hard. But today, for me, fintech in the retail space has become business as usual. And there was a catalyst, and the catalyst was COVID. And so now everybody banks online and nobody really even thinks about what's happened. The same is going to happen in the wholesale markets. And it's going to happen, I think, probably in the next 3 to 5 years. I think the catalyst for some of this is that government, be it the UK, but actually many governments, have run out of money. And one of the ways of actually finding that money is really investing in our wholesale markets and digitalising our wholesale markets. I became very interested in the digitalisation of our wholesale markets when, a few years ago, my father died. He loved to buy shares, and I discovered that actually this was a really painful, terrible thing that he'd been doing because it took me 2.5 years to wind up his estate. Fortunately, it was just after COVID, because pre-COVID, to transfer a share in the UK, you had to stamp the head of the young Queen Victoria. We are still talking about dematerialising our shares. We are still talking about dematerialising our bond market. It's unacceptable. You cannot tokenise. And it goes actually back to points that made earlier about understanding, having clarity about what it means. Government now is talking about tokenisation, but you cannot tokenise unless you've dematerialised. And that, in my view, needs to come from government with a very clear vision to do that very, very quickly, because tokenisation and then the payment leg that needs to go with it will not happen. But despite government, I think people in this room and people in this area are going to move to tokenisation because it really will take out massive costs. It will enable us, not only in the wholesale markets, but the retail markets, to invest in the UK and elsewhere. 6 to 7 million people buy crypto. If we had the shares of Rolls-Royce PLC on our phones, wouldn't it be healthier to buy UK PLC, Rolls-Royce PLC, or the shares, the bonds of our small businesses? But it's going to happen.
Absolutely. Thank you. Nazareen, just building on that, what opportunities are there to leverage the UK's leading financial market infrastructure to drive growth and international competitiveness?
Yeah, so, as I've just mentioned, I think we operate world-class market infrastructure in the UK. We are globally recognized for our market infrastructure, for our risk management, for our operational excellence and resilience, and I think that is a national strength that we definitely need to build on. It needs stewardship, and what I mean by that is we need to create a regulatory and policy environment that really protects the competitiveness of our UK infrastructure. So we need to be dismantling technical based regulation where it exists, where we have perhaps inherited it. We've seen some good examples of this with the FCA recently responding to the market participants around some thresholds that basically encouraged business to move to European banks. They were really swift in their response. But I think it's important to recognize how quickly the dial can turn and how we have to be adaptive to how things are changing at such a pace. I think the other thing that's really important is around the regulatory framework is what we're doing in the digital asset space, and I think we need to approach it with same risk, same regulation. We need to look at what's working in conventional markets and look to adapt that first. Because obviously we're seeing positive things with the Digital Security Sandbox and the FCA Regulatory Sandbox, but we need to really, the real prize is how do we encourage market-led innovation. Sandboxes are great when we need new rules, but we really need to be in an environment where we're encouraging innovation, risk-taking within the framework that we have in place today, like we're seeing in other jurisdictions, and that we're not left behind. And I think the other thing that we really need to look at is the structural framework of our regulatory oversight. In a world where digital assets are redefining how trading, clearing, and settlement happen, those things are happening at once, atomically. We need a framework that moves and modernizes as our markets are modernizing. And so what I mean by that is a regulatory framework that looks at those individual things in isolation as sequential processes is going to struggle to keep up with these innovative platforms that are redefining the way these trade flows are moving.
Very good. And of course, Chris Willard, as the Digital Markets Champion, is going to be leading a lot of what you've just mentioned.
And it's fab. That's really fab.
Yeah, very good news. Dan, tax, it's your speciality.
It's all I do, yes.
The City UK's No Time to Lose report is clear that UK must move from ambition to execution. So as you look across the policy, regulation, and the tax system, which practical reforms would most improve the UK's ability to attract and deploy capital for growth?
Okay, let's assume that no government actually wants to cut spending or cut welfare, or is politically able to. And I think that's realistic. So the level of tax is going to stay about the same and or increase slightly over time, realistically. What tax changes can be made more or less costlessly that make the UK not competitive, more competitive? Right at the top, stamp duty. We have the highest rate of stamp duties, financial transaction tax on shares of any major market. It's not even close. Oxera did a report which shows reasonably convincingly that there would be no net cost from abolishing stamp duty once you take everything into account. That's something that sadly is politically challenging. The Tories don't want to do it because they think it would look like a handout to their mates in the city. That means you. Labour doesn't want to do it because they think it means a handout to the city. Maybe a future Labour leader would take a Nixon to China moment and realise it's something actually only the Labour Party can politically do, and I think it would be a huge win for the country if they did it. So that's the first difficult one. What are our other problems? Complexity. I personally saw numerous businesses, financial businesses, industrial businesses, decide not to headquarter in the UK and to go elsewhere, not because of our rate of tax, but because of the rate of change and because of complexity. What government should do, not a bureaucrat-driven, detailed academic process like the old Office of Tax Simplification, something really simple where you invite industry, invite advisors to identify tax rules which no longer serve a purpose, which are there for reasons of ancient history, do nothing except add complexity, and which we could execute one by one. And it's pretty easy to come up with a list of dozens like that. A quick plug for the Tax Policy Associates website where you've done that. We went through one example, a US business setting up a UK subsidiary. How many rules do they have to go to work out how to capitalise it? 12 sets of rules. So these are areas, complexity, stamp duty, which a government could look at and make the UK more competitive without cost. They need to look at income tax, the way in which we penalise people earning between £100,000 and £125,000, completely irrational. Look at VAT, the VAT base, lots of things that could be done without cost, but it takes political commitment and it takes a bit of political courage.
Dan, thank you. Bruce, with your pension hat on, as Chair of Rothesay, what would you add to that?
Well, I think building on Dan's point, I think the flip side of his comments on complexity are what we all know we need is stability, predictability, and transparency. And you need that more than ever if you're in the pensions industry, because we're dealing with liabilities that go out 30, 40, 50 years. And if you're not saving today, you're certainly not going to have enough when you get to the other end, and everybody knows the value of compounding your investments over time. And so how do we persuade people to start now for a retirement that may be 30, 40, 50 years away? And one of the things you do is have an underpin of confidence that if I put that money to work today, the rules aren't going to change on me either retrospectively or prospectively. And we just haven't had that for a number of years. The constant tinkering around this, not just in the world of pensions, but particularly in the world of pensions, has been a big problem for getting people to invest. The cost of living stresses that people have don't help either, because people's money gets hypothecated to the short-term needs of getting through the day or the week, and people don't have a lot of savings available. And so what are the incentives here to get people to think long-term on a consistent basis? And tax plays a huge part in all of this. And what we also know is that people aren't saving enough, and the balance of responsibility comes back to the government at the point when people don't have enough money to live on at the back end of their lives, when inevitably things become more expensive around issues of health, for instance.
Very, very good, thank you. Stephen, capital, firms and talent are increasingly mobile. How important is international openness and regulatory cooperation to the UK's competitiveness? And why is the UK strategically important in building international business?
The official sector in the UK's renewed focus on growth and competitiveness has been very welcome on this front. Capital markets, as I think we all know, play an essential role in channeling savings into productive investments, generating returns for investors, and financing growth and innovation in the real economy. But this necessitates risk-taking by entrepreneurs building businesses, by investors who are entrusting their capital in businesses. So at its core, I think we need to reorient policy to encourage responsible risk-taking, but to encourage risk-taking. And I think there may have been an over-bias over the past decade and a half to just fundamentally discouraging risk-taking within various parts of the financial ecosystem. So I think it's welcome to see a recalibration of the policy environment along that front. And in that vein, I think I would like to compliment HMT, the Bank of England, and FCA for an ongoing and thoughtful approach to financial market evolution and regulation. There's, I think, truly an open dialogue between industry and policymakers on measures that can improve the integrity, efficiency, resiliency, and competitiveness of markets. And as markets evolve, that includes appropriately encouraging a more diverse and innovative financial market ecosystem, and ensuring that the UK is a leading destination, not just for banks and insurers, but for traditional asset managers, alternative asset managers, market makers, fintech firms, innovators in the digital asset space. So I think that's the right approach. Just two sort of quick examples of things we've seen that I think are quite positive. So the Bank of England, rightly has a mandate on to ensure financial market stability and resiliency. There have been a lot of questions over the past few years as the growth of the quote-unquote non-bank sector has rivaled the banking sector in terms of assets. I think in certain jurisdictions around the world, the response to that has been to shoot first and ask questions later. But I think the Bank of England instead said, okay, we see this trend emerging in our markets. Let's make sure we better understand it, better understand any risks, novel risks that it may pose, and how the risks of non-banks intersect with the banking sector. And so they've undertaken now not one, but two what are called system-wide exploratory scenarios to actually methodically, over the course of a year, study how these markets operate and what certain shocks would lead to. And that's led to lessons learned that can then be examined through further policy approaches. So now, for example, there's ongoing discussions about measures to enhance the resiliency of the gilt repo market, as that was identified in the first SWES exercise as one potential system-wide financial stability risk. So I think that sort of very thoughtful, methodical approach by the Bank of England to addressing financial stability risks has been quite welcome. It's a foundation for stability. It helps people trust the UK financial system and the policymakers that oversee it. Lastly, I would just say at the same time, the FCA, I think, has been very forward-looking, again, in trying to encourage competitiveness and recalibrating regulations and streamlining and simplifying regulations where appropriate. And in the coming weeks and months, there's a few exciting things on the horizon. On Monday, the new consolidated tape for the UK bond market will go live, bringing another dose of transparency to what is actually an even more essential market for capital formation than the equity markets. In July, much needed reforms to the short selling framework are due to take effect, and this will mark a departure from a sort of regressive EU inherited approach to short selling, which actually inhibits capital allocation by international investors to the market. And lastly, I think in the coming months, we're expecting a discussion paper or concept release on further reforms that can be made to the UK equity markets. And I think as it was alluded to, that will include examining ways that we can make the experience in the UK for individual investors better, because I think today UK individual or retail investors don't necessarily get the best outcomes they could.
Stephen, thank you. Now I'm conscious that we're going to come on to some Q&A, so anyone want to send any questions? And I've got a couple here, but any others? But now just to sort of to wrap it up before we go to another sort of question to each of you on the panel. A core message today is that growth depends on cooperation between industry, government and regulators, which we've heard clearly. If we look ahead to the next 12 to 18 months, what is one tangible action that needs to take to turn this into real growth? Sharon.
I do think that there is an increasing amount of excellent work between government, the regulators and industry. Many in this room contribute to that feeling. And I do think actually a lot of progress has been made. I will take you up on one point. I also strongly believe in a principles and outcomes-based form of regulation. But there have been a number of instances over the last while. So, for example, the Motor Dealer Commission's incident, where regulation has been looked at retrospectively, and I don't think that that is at all helpful. So I think that a vision, clarity about that vision, and, like tax, like pensions, is it right that my pension advisor tells me you shouldn't contribute to your pension anymore, Sharon? I just don't think it is. But clarity, purpose is really important. And number one for me, we need to dematerialize tomorrow.
Very good. So, Nazareen.
Yeah, I think pace is really important. I think what you're seeing in other leading financial jurisdictions is not only pace, but there is a collaborative approach to how existing frameworks are being used to address evolving technologies, especially in the digital the digital assets space. And I think the call for input from the Bank of England and FCA is encouraging, giving us a direction of travel. But personally, when I read that, I was somewhat alarmed by the number of consultation papers that are due to come out. And I think when you're working in an industry that defies borders, and you're looking at other jurisdictions, your competitors, and the pace that they are moving, I think we need to be mindful of that. Sandboxes are great where there's new regulatory regimes required, but we really have to be able to innovate outside of sandboxes.
Bruce.
I think the point has been well made in terms of pace. I kind of reflect that the Mansion House Accord was in 2023. It's about to have its 3rd anniversary. It made lots of promises about things we do by 2030, which you might even argue is too long a time frame, but we're nearly halfway there. And you have to ask yourself exactly what's landed tangibly in those last 3 years. And so we're not getting enough done quickly enough. I think the other piece is that I think we end up always challenging what government needs to do for us. And I think as an industry collected in this room, we ought to think about how clear are the messages we're giving to government, because I think we undermine our own messaging by disagreeing with each other. And sometimes we ought to be coming together and say, actually, while I don't specifically agree with X, 80% of this is in the right direction and I ought to give it my support, and we ought to be able to boil down. So if stamp duty is the single most important tax change, why aren't we all saying that and delivering that message very clearly to the government? And how would we rehearse what those key messages are amongst us? Because then you surely will have influence on the outcomes. But for as long as we end up disagreeing with each other, we get into lowest common denominator stuff, the government can pick and choose or in many cases do nothing. And so what we can control becomes really important.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, government, taking solutions to government is much better than criticising government. Stephen.
So the UK is hosting the G20 summit next year. And so I think as part of that global economic leadership role, I think I'd like to see one of the pillars of that be a focus on how capital markets can be leveraged to deliver on the economic growth objective and improve outcomes across the board internationally.
Dan.
There's so much I could talk about, but let's focus obsessively on stamp duty.
Yeah, okay.
People wonder, why does the UK attract so few IPOs? Stamp duty, there's no mystery. Why would you list in the UK when it's going to increase your cost of capital by something like between 5 and 10% just because of stamp duty? It's amazing the UK markets have been successful as they have, the equity markets anyway. So what should be done? Well, I think there needs to be a renewed effort from the city and city institutions on this. The Auxerre report, which showed an apparent tax positive benefit from abolishing it, is good but quite old now. The city should go out of its way to show there is robust data on this. For example, you could commission 3 separate independent economists, publish your instructions to them, be clear that you're not querying the pitch, you're trying to get the real answer, what would the actual effect be of abolishing stamp, see what they say. I think they'd all come out and say it would be a positive. That would be an amazing lobbying tool.
Thank you. Right, now some questions. I'm going to start off with the first one from Jennifer Green. Cooperation between industry, government and regulators is vital to drive growth and competitiveness, and I think we all agree with that. The approach to risk is a societal issue, as the leader of the opposition set out in her earlier speech. We can change regulation, but it's harder to change culture. How can industry support that? Who would like to take that one?
Well, I'm happy to have a go. I mean, I do sense that in government and in our regulators, there is a growing appetite for risk again. And this has changed dramatically after 15 years where we were trying to eliminate risk from the system. And that's to be welcomed. But it comes back to this issue of pace. And we've talked about it already on this panel. If you start worrying about digitalization of the economy, cyber risks in the economy, if you put all of these into a sandbox, it becomes a delaying issue. It doesn't matter that the regulator is interested in participating in the testing of these things. I think you've got to get out and put these things to work and then learn as you go. And clearly when you do that, you will make mistakes. And we've got to be tolerant of the right kinds of mistakes and intolerant of the wrong kind of mistakes as we do that. But if we're not willing to accept the downside of taking more risk, we surely won't benefit from the rewards of taking more risk. And I think we'd all agree with that, but we need to be very careful about how we message that, because regulation creates asymmetric winners and losers every time a new rule is changed or imposed. And so we end up dividing ourselves between the winners and losers on any regulation. And so when you come to change it, it's very hard to create consensus. And I don't think anybody wants to get back to no regulation. We understand the value of good regulation. But the point that has been made repeatedly today across the sessions is that too much regulation definitely deters investment, and people go elsewhere, and they're increasingly free to go elsewhere.
Anyone else want to jump in on that? Dan.
I think there's something of a cultural problem that in this country we over-regulate and under-enforce. So we produce swathes of regulation, and not just tax, but regulation, which people in this room spend a lot of time dealing with. On the other hand, there are large numbers of people who sell essentially fraudulent financial products. The regulators stand by. Eventually, compensation ends up being paid out, and those responsible wander over and then do the same thing for another company again and again. That combination of over-regulation for the good guys and lack of enforcement for bad actors is quite dangerous. And it would be a good idea to revisit that, have a bit less regulation, and much more aggressive policing of the people who break the rules that are there.
Another question. As AI transforms financial services, where do you see the greatest opportunity for the UK to establish a genuine global competitive advantage rather than simply keeping pace with others? Stephen. Only because you can give us the US balance as well as what you see here in the UK. I mean, people forget the UK is the third in AI around the world. We are right up there, but we've got to just keep up there.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have any particular advice for on that front. I will say within the context of financial services, I think it is first and foremost been to date a productivity enhancement tool. It's made research easier, it's made encoding more efficient, it's streamlined more and more manual processes. That said, it's not necessarily new. I think the emergence of agentic AI has caught a lot of imagination, but different algorithmic and machine learning techniques have been leveraged by market participants for decades now. And I think as we look at it from a sort of a regulatory framework, it's not clear we need a new suite of regulations. I think a lot of regulations that exist actually have been developed to be technology agnostic and can be appropriately applied.
I think, I'm going to take a slightly different approach at this. I guess as a mother with 2 young children, I'm very interested in AI and how it's the future of it and how it's going to transform our lives. I mean, I used to be like, do your maths homework. Now I'm like, do your ballet practice, because AI is not going to take over performing arts. But
True.
But I think there's a huge responsibility on companies on how we're integrating AI into the jobs. I heard somewhere that what's going to set people apart is actually how they integrate AI and how they utilize it to become more efficient and not really make themselves redundant. But I think there's a social responsibility about what we're doing in terms of ensuring that those foundational roles that are going to be the next generation of expertise continue to be invested in and are not overlooked because we have AI that can review pages of contracts, and we don't need a junior to go through that, because those are skill sets that we'll need. Because AI is you need the expertise to verify the output. And if we forget that, then we'll end up in a situation where we're just being blindly led by hallucinations. So I think that's for me, I think that's super important.
Anyone else? Dan?
I think the UK has an amazing opportunity to not do the wrong thing. So the EU seems dead set on doing the wrong thing with AI by over-regulating. And as ever with this, they'll regulate for how things looked 2 years ago and be hopelessly out of date by the time reality catches up. China obviously has all the issues that go with being an authoritarian regime, and America seems to have, well, at least Trump has a capricious attitude. Look at what happened to Anthropic last week, which means if you were looking to build an AI business, would you really choose that? Is that a risk that your business can deal with? So by not making those mistakes, the UK has an opportunity.
Agree. Well, thank you. Thank you for the questions from the audience, and thank you to the panel. And certainly some of the themes that have come out is we need to move at pace to stay more competitive. The regulatory environment needs to help protect that competitiveness. It's good to see compliments to the FCA and the Bank of England from the panel. Talent, I always say we shouldn't take it for granted, but as I said earlier, we are in an extraordinary city, and talent still wants to come to this city. And then the digital asset space, where obviously a lot of pressure on my friend Chris Willard, but I'm sure he'll deliver. And then on tax, stamp duty, I think, Bruce, absolutely. Let's get to, and as I'm on the board of TheCityUK, I'm sure Miles is taking this on, and John, that let's push on stamp duty, which I'm sure we are already. And then let's encourage more risk-taking. There is risk in risk-taking, but it sounds like that we should be doing more of that. So thank you, everybody, and we will now pass over to the next speaker. Thank you.